So I think that slow adoption of AI is a much bigger problem than anyone wants to really talk about. And in this video, I'm just going to share a little bit about what slow adoption looks like, why a lot of companies and people are struggling with AI adoption, and why the consequences on the negative side of the ledger are being glossed over a little bit in a lot of the anti-AI backlash we're seeing all around the Western world in particular. So I saw a pretty funny statistic the other day, and it was about people who are sabotaging AI projects in their workplace. Something like 29% of people admitted in the survey to sabotaging an AI project at work, which is an interesting take, but I can see where it's coming from. A lot of what people hear in the media is AI is going to take your job, AI is going to do this, AI is going to disempower you, maybe everyone will die if AI gets to super intelligence or whatever. So when you hear all of this and then you map it back to the sci-fi transformer type ideas that people have around AI, it's not surprising that when your manager tries to roll out AI in your workplace, you decide that you can't be bothered, you've got no interest, and you just want to see that project fail. And a lot of these companies, the project isn't failing because AI can't do something, it's because the team might be actively undermining it, or the business itself never did any change management training or set things up with the right foundations so that the AI agents actually have clean data to work with in a secure environment, and they're configured properly so that they can't go off and do the sorts of bad things that are ending up in the headlines in regards to cybersecurity risk. There's also the challenge that a lot of businesses before the AI era have never really taken technology seriously. They might have spent and thought in their own minds at board and executive level that they spend so much on technology. But in reality, when you interact with their mobile phone app and find that in some flows you have to ring the call center, or you are on the web portal and you find that you can't do a certain thing self-service, but you've got to chat with someone. These are symptoms of companies that haven't taken technology seriously even before the AI era. So companies like that are the typical company. Like, there are actually very few companies that were in a very good place before AI came along and had experience with things like machine learning, like deep learning, and with technology forward. So it's not a surprise that some of the biggest companies on the planet, the banks, the insurers, the big tech firms, Netflix, whatever, all of these companies that had experience with algorithmic decision making and had invested a fortune in making everything easy for algorithms to work inside their operating model, it found it a little bit easier to lean into the AI revolution and start seeing results. But most businesses just aren't like that. So what's happening with slow adoption of AI is people are trying to find in the unemployment and in the economic data the aggregate impact of AI. But if only a handful of firms were even in a position to properly take advantage of it, you're not going to see that impact yet, are you? And that's one reason why in my newsletter, Getting AI to Work, I've been writing a lot about how the companies that are going to take advantage of AI aren't necessarily going to be the existing incumbents in an industry, because with AI you have an opportunity to rethink every single component of your operating model in an AI first way. Imagine if you had a blank whiteboard and you could rebuild your entire business from scratch. What would that look like? What would you get rid of from a process perspective? What would you get rid of from a platform perspective? Are there new features and innovations that you could more affordably and profitably offer your customers? All of this stuff comes into view when you start rethinking your operating model with AI. And I know that a lot of people will claim that they can't find use cases for AI in their business, but at this point, that's really a lack of imagination. And if you can't find a use case for your business, drop a comment below, because I'd be really interested to know what sort of industry you're working in. Even the most regulated industries are deploying AI. If the military and intelligence communities, healthcare and financial services can deploy AI, I'm pretty sure your suburban business will be able to figure out some AI use cases. But the wider problem is that people have thought that this is a technology problem when it's really just a people problem, like every other project. If you don't have the right culture where people can experiment, use trial and error to figure out what works and doesn't work in your business, and then from that process knowledge you develop from getting the shock anthropic invoice or experiencing a major outage because someone deployed an agentic tool to the wrong workflow at the wrong time. If you don't actually develop that knowledge yourself, you're never going to learn what the boundaries of what AI can and can't do for you and your business are. Why does slow AI adoption matter? Why does it hurt your business? Why is it not the best outcome? Well, everything you're doing at the moment, which is a manual task that doesn't have to be or shouldn't be, is a complete waste of resources. So across the whole economy, when productivity in many countries is already quite poor, everything that you're not automating that you could is hurting living standards, is hurting the economy. More profitable and efficient businesses is one of the only paths forward for fixing living standards and fixing productivity in Western countries. And what that means is, of course, there's going to be some impact on jobs in the long run. Does it mean that everyone is going to lose their job? No. Does it mean that some people will lose their job in the transition and will need to reskill and upskill and do something else? Yes, it does. Does it mean that some politicians have no idea that any of this is actually happening and still have their heads in the sand? I think that would be a fair comment to make. But the slower AI adoption goes, the bigger the competitive risk becomes in a globalized competitive world. You see, we're tipping over into hyper competition, where as the cost of replicating things like software, which used to be a very high margin thing, become cheaper and cheaper, things like tech exports, where you have homegrown unicorn tech companies, become harder to produce because more and more people are just going to use agentic coding tools to solve their problems when they have the problem. And they're not going to bother paying millions and millions of dollars on all these SaaS subscriptions and software subscriptions. So some of the highest predicted profitability categories of business that will raise our productivity and living standards are the ones that are going to be most impacted from this whole wave of AI change. So it's not just about people losing jobs and businesses losing jobs. It's as soon as the first movers in an industry shift over to most of their value chain coming from AI-enabled and optimized workflows flowing into how they deliver products and services, that is going to give them a massive price and quality advantage. And that price and quality advantage is increasingly going to become harder and harder to compete against on a global level. If you think what I'm saying is nonsense, why has outsourcing and offshoring grown so much? Not on a quality comparison, just on a price comparison and labor cost comparison alone. Executives the world over have decided to move a ton of jobs and tasks out of their home countries to cheaper destinations. Now, what's going to happen with AI? Well, one way to think about it is when Dario Amodei at Anthropic talks about a country of geniuses in a data center is one way to have a mental model of what better AI capability looks like. Well, AI is just another country you can outsource everything to, and every few months we get more and more tasks that are better done with AI agents. So maybe one mental model to think of is we were already on a race to the bottom with the cost of producing everything, manufacturing, services, everything. There's been this drive to optimize and show in every quarterly earnings call that everything is getting better, faster, and cheaper. AI is like accelerant on that trend, and it's only going to get worse. So basically, one way of thinking about this is the cost differential between some of the Chinese open weight models and the frontier US models. The difference is 50 to 100 times cheaper. Are they at the highest level of quality? No, not yet. They're still a few months behind, but not far at all. And people who say that you don't need to worry about those models just aren't doing enough testing themselves to understand what those model capability differences look like at the coalface when you're using these tools. So the slow AI adoption is effectively conceding and losing the race by not participating, by not leaning in, by not thinking about every single bottleneck in your business. How do I use AI to fix this? When someone says to you they can't figure out AI use cases, that is a serious problem. If you're a board director, an executive, or a business owner, and you're thinking like that, that is not the mindset that is going to help you win in the AI era. I'd be interested in hearing what you think about all of this. Do you think slow AI adoption is a massive risk for society at large? Drop a comment below, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.